It's Raluca. There you go. I need to remember that it's Oton now. And I work in my full-time post as an intensive care nurse in Oxford. And I am the Midlands Hub Lead, and also I'm a trustee for the Council of Deans of Health, and sort of do a podcast when I've got time free, a little bit of time in between. But today we're going to have two really great speakers on two different, quite different themes, but really, really exciting themes. The first speaker is Jess Sainsbury, and I have come across Jess on Twitter, as you do, and been introduced to Jess by Gemma from Florence Nightingale Foundation. So Jess is a registered adult and mental health nurse. She's currently the co-lead of the RCN Newly Registered Nurses Network, and she's also a member of the Nursing Now Challengers Committee, advocating for early career nurses locally and also internationally. Jess has encouraged collaborative working across many forums, challenging hierarchy and ways of working. She is currently on the secondment at the Florence Nightingale Foundation as a research and policy assistant, working on multi-professional students' shared decision-making councils. Jess is on a variety of platforms, and what Jess is going to talk to us about today is the use of social media as a networking tool. And to be honest, Jess is one of the people that I do look up for all the things that she sort of achieved so quickly, and the impact she has. So with no further ado, Jess, over to you.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for having me today. So nice to see you. Okay, so I'm talking about social media and I always get nervous when I share my screens. So just bear with me a second. Okay, I'm hoping you can see that all right.
It's all working.
Amazing, thanks so much. Okay, so during this session, I actively encourage use of social media. I don't mind you using your phones, but equally, if you want to completely immerse yourself, that's absolutely fine as well. At the bottom of each slide, I've included my handles for the first ones for Twitter and the second ones for Instagram. Those are the platforms that I use most regularly. So if you do share on social media, please do tag me so that I can find you and then retweet, reshare, all of that kind of stuff.
Just before you start, Jess, if anyone wants to add questions, please put them in the chat. I'll keep an eye out for them there as well.
Lovely, thank you. So thank you, Raluca, for such a lovely introduction. But as you said, I joined the register in September 2020, so I am an early career nurse. My first post was a split one at my local trust, so I didn't really take the usual path right from the off. So 3 days a week, I worked in older persons' mental health in a community team, and I really wanted to use both skill sets because I'm a registered adult and a registered mental health nurse, and that was a fab opportunity there. But then I have a passion for education, so I worked in my trust's educators in practice team alongside that. It involved a lot of organisation, but I definitely enjoyed both roles equally. But then since April this year, I've been on secondment to the Florence Nightingale Foundation, and it's primarily to lead on a Health Education England project, establishing multi-professional student shared professional decision-making councils. That is a bit of a mouthful, but I promise you it's completely worth it. So yeah, during my time as a student, which I can't believe is nearly a year ago now, I got very involved with the Royal College of Nursing. I must admit that the word activist completely put me off as in the early days as a first year, but now I'm really proud to call myself that, an activist and an advocate for nursing as a profession. And I believe that social media has a great role to play in that. But when I was one of those active students, I held a position of chair of the students committee, but nowadays I'm there advocating for newly registered nurses, early career nurses through the network, alongside an absolutely fantastic early career military nurse, Kendall. You should definitely follow her as well if you're on socials. So finally on this slide, I've put clinical supervision in there because when I do these sessions with students, I encourage them to have a think about, you know, what is it that you're really passionate about? What is kind of your niche? That may change over time. So one of mine currently is clinical supervision. I chair Florence Nightingale Foundation's subject expert group for this, and it includes individuals from organisations such as the RCN, such as I've popped their hashtag on there, Team CNO, but the Chief Nursing Office for England, experts in the field such as Professor Tony Butterworth, and we bring them all together, and our aim is to make clinical supervision common practice within all fields of nursing. So just a little bit of something that I'm interested in that I've popped on there too. So now actually on to social media. People frequently ask me how I manage to network. How do you do it? And now I am heavily reliant on tools such as the ones you can see on the screen. There are other tools available. It takes organization by scheduling some tweets. That's one of my not quite so well-known secrets. It gives me that time off. So believe it or not, I'm not permanently attached to a screen or a phone or anything like that. These tools allow you to share content with the online community that you're part of without you even being at the other end of it. Canva, so the third icon you can see along there is what I've used for this presentation today, and I use it also for graphics, which tend to get more engagement when you share information on platforms such as Twitter. So if you look at the analytics, you can then see how many people have clicked on it or how far the post has, what the reach has been, and they tend to be more when you use graphics. So I use Canva for that, and this tool in itself, it actually has templates on there. So there's no need to, you know, be one of those whizzy, really graphically minded people. You can completely use this tool, not reinvent the wheel, and get some more engagement. But the first thing I'd really love to hear from you is, what social media applications do you use professionally, if any at all? Because I'm really keen to hear from others about what they use, and I'll come back to that in the chat shortly. So I am pitching this for those that may not use social media professionally, but if you are a pro, please do let us know. Please do reveal yourselves and share your top tips and suggestions as well with the rest of the group. Now, I started doing these sessions when I was a student myself, because I vividly remember being sat in my university induction as, you know, first year student, and being told, do not use social media as a student nurse. Don't identify as a student nurse on your social media, because you'll probably get drunk, post something inappropriate, and then you'll be struck off before you've even started. So it was a real fear factor. Now, as nurses, we are trained to think critically. So I did challenge this over my 4 years as a student nurse, and it did end up in me delivering sessions for first years. And now as a registrant, I do follow it through the education program as well. So there are sessions at first, you know, dipping your toe in social media, but then, you know, how can you really use it? And then how can you utilize it for that transition from student to registrant, which is the feedback has been, that's been really helpful for them. So why do we need to use social media, or why is it a good thing to use? So it's because the digital age of healthcare is upon us, and that's not just the tools that we use in practice, it's also the wider community as well. And in my opinion, I believe we should really embrace it, but also we should be aware of how to use it safely. I'm not just saying go out there and share your life story, because, you know, we do need to be boundaried sometimes. We do need to make sure we keep ourselves safe. And I'm sure you've had a horror story or two when it comes to social media and just think, okay, I'll just avoid that. Firstly, I would like to signpost you to handy regulatory body guidelines. So within the UK, that's obviously the Nursing and Midwifery Council, but there are other guidelines for different countries as well. And this holds, you know, that basic do's and don'ts essentially. So definitely go and look those up. Next up, I would advise to look at local guidelines. So the organisation you work for is highly likely to have a policy. And obviously for students, they have university guidelines as well. And I have found quite a lot of variation in them. Now, you can challenge those as well, because some of them are very black and white around what you can and cannot do, but that's completely up to you. So once you've done that, start to dip your toe in it. So some people do what we call as lurking. So they create a profile, they follow a few people, but they don't actually post anything. That's absolutely fine. I think I probably did that to start with as well. So you follow people that you're interested in, or organizations that you're interested in, causes that you're passionate about. See how they use this platform that you've joined, and then start posting content yourself. But don't leave it too long before you start to do that. What you will find pretty quickly is that there is a virtual supportive community on social media. There are tens of thousands of nurses on Twitter alone, sharing best practice, seeking advice, and contributing to discussions and policy sometimes as well. Each of the platforms listed on the slide here have their own merits. Twitter is one that I really do push. So that's good for for tweet chats, which is an online facilitated conversation that can be facilitated by individuals or organizations. And they can actually count as continuing professional development hours as well. There's also Instagram. To me, Instagram feels more of kind of, a warm, fuzzy community. There's a lot of story sharing going on there. And it's good to just kind of see stories from others who are in a similar position as yourself or not. I've mentioned a few times, I'm a year from registering, but it's important to me to know what's going on for students now. So Instagram's a good way of kind of getting that feel. Facebook. A lot of people aren't really using Facebook that much anymore, but there are still some closed groups on there and discussions within them, which can be really helpful as well for getting advice and guidance. I have put TikTok on there, but a slight disclaimer, my 12-year-old son tells me I'm too old for it and I shouldn't put it on here. But I have to include it. So personally, I don't use TikTok for nursing, just because I can't keep up with it. It's too much for me. Even someone organized like me, just no. But many people are using this for quick educational and awareness building videos. My son tells me it's really easy, but some people are doing it really well. But equally, some people are probably sharing inappropriate things as well. But you get that with all of the platforms, but just go with whichever one feels more comfortable for you, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So let's do a quick scenario, because I'm very conscious that it's me just talking at you. A lot of the feedback I get is that people are unsure when it comes to acceptable content. And when I do this with students, I throw a load of scenarios at them, but I'm only going to do one with you all. So using the chat function, if you could let me know whether you think this scenario on the screen is acceptable, unacceptable, or just if you're unsure. If you could also let us know your reasons why or why not, that would be great. So the scenario is that Zhang was alone in the staff room during their break and decided to make a TikTok video. The content of the TikTok included jokes about a psychiatric ward that they were working on, and Zhang was in full uniform at the time, including their ID badge. Do you think this is acceptable, unacceptable, or are you not sure?
Completely unacceptable, says a mental health nurse.
Would you mind sharing why you think it's unacceptable?
Jokes about the psychiatric ward, on a psychiatric ward in uniform with your name tag, doesn't seem to be appropriate, because these social media channels are also used by a lot of patients, and this might cause some disturbance and again, stigmatization to the people that we're caring for. So that's why I think it's not acceptable.
Fantastic, thank you. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and I can see some comments as well. So the reason why I include this one as someone who's advocating for the use of social media is this is actually a real example of something that happened with some students that I was supporting. Yeah, I know. So I do have to kind of bring it back and remind people that whilst social media is amazing, sometimes stepping over the line happens, and it's important that we all learn from it. So, you know, the jokes about where they were, that's not okay, even if they were in uniform and showing their ID badge. Some trusts or some organisations, they do allow pictures in uniform because it's good for recruitment and activities like that. But you just need to consider things like whether there's identifiable information, the setting, things like that. So yes, this example is unacceptable, but there are things that we can pull out from there as well. So thank you so much for engaging in that. So networking now more than ever, with a global pandemic going on, social media is an excellent tool for networking. I've used social media to have conversations with nursing leaders who I may never have had access to before. I've also met other early career nurses in similar positions to myself who have honestly become a lifeline. There are so many personal and professional networking benefits, and I'd love to hear yours if you use it as well. Now, social media is a way to share your voice, your story, your why. Why did I become a nurse? Don't get sucked into numbers of followers or replies to your posts. Sometimes I'll put an Instagram story up and I'll get no responses. That's okay. Because I can tell you now that your interactions will have a positive impact on someone out there, and that's what matters. I would encourage you to take care of your profile, however, and what I mean by that is that you have a bio. It doesn't have to include lots and lots of information, but just something to identify who you are and what you're about, and a picture. Now, I have been challenged on the picture front, and when I say picture, some people don't want to put their own face on their social media profiles, and that's fine. So it could be an object, it could be a pet, it could be an avatar. It's completely up to you, but something is definitely better than nothing because it makes you more human and accessible to others. An additional benefit is that it helps keep you in touch with others, from that amazing nurse you met at a conference to former work colleagues that may not make your Facebook friends list. There are a lot of student and early career nurses seeking coaching and reverse mentoring opportunities, which are beneficial to both parties. So why not reach out via social media and offer this if you can spare, say, an hour every 6 weeks or so? There'll be someone out there who will be absolutely desperate for it. So I've mentioned about your why already, but it has taken me a long time to realize that that's okay. So my previous career before I decided to retrain and become a nurse was in HR, and I wouldn't put anything personal on social media at all. So I am completely converted. So it is incredibly valuable to share your story. By that, you don't have to share every single detail, just share what you're comfortable with. And my key message again is that every story, every voice matters, and social media is a way of sharing that. An example that I like to share from personal experience of the impact that social media can have is last year, the Minister for Care in England, Helen Whately, she wrote back to one of her constituents. They'd written her a letter. And within it, she said that student nurses do not provide a service to health and social care. So I read this online on social media on a Saturday night with a glass of wine, and I thought, probably shouldn't respond now. So I didn't, and I left it till the next morning. And what I did do using the platform of Twitter is I tweeted back to where this had been shared, tagged her in, and I offered to have a conversation so that she could understand the contribution that student nurses make to health and social care. And she agreed. I'm really sorry if you can hear my dog. And she agreed to have a meeting, obviously virtually, because it was 2020. And after that, we had many conversations, and the Royal College of Nursing Students Committee had that route in to, you know, the Minister of Care, which was a huge change. And it's just, I really like to use that as an example of A, don't tweet when you're drinking red wine, and B, you know, it's about the approach you take and how you speak to these people, even when it is on a virtual platform. Like my nan used to say, if you're not going to say it nicely to their face, don't say anything at all. And one more example, if I may, because it actually links to what I'm doing right now. So at so I'm based down in on the south coast of England, in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. I attended a system event back in the days where you could do things face to face, and the stories that were shared with me from other students, I then shared at this event. And their stories were around their struggles when it comes to, you know, finances and being able to get to their practice placements. And those stories helped create a student nursing council, which now I am basing the model on to roll out the shared decision-making councils that I mentioned at the start. And that's as a result of stories telling on social media and then sharing it with others. So I am going to
Hi everyone, my
I'm
name's
just going to introduce them before they start talking. So I have I think it's just over 2 minutes, maybe, a video to share with you about the benefits of social media and finding that kind of support network as well. So the first one is Claire, and I'm going to hand over to Claire.
Claire. Jess has asked me to explain why finding your people, having a network is important. For me, as a newly registered nurse, there's loads of reasons, and I have loads of support face-to-face and online. But one of the biggest things in the pandemic is I'm working from home as a community nurse, and having that support network has allowed me to find somewhere that I can talk things through, have kind of informal supervision and a chance to reflect without bringing it straight into my living room. It's helped keep me balanced, and it's given people who will challenge me and help me to move forwards.
Hi, my name's Molly and I'm a final year student mental health nurse at Mumford University in Leicester. So my nursing journey has been emphasised by the support network that I've been able to build from using social media, Twitter in particular. I think student nurses, we're not like normal students. We haven't got the kind of luxury of lots of time off, annual leave, and things like that. So I think for us it's really important to make sure that we have like a group of people that we can turn to who understand what we're going through. And for me, Twitter has been a big part. Twitter's played a massive role. I started a blog called The Pint-Sized Student Nurse purely from seeing other student nurses on Twitter and being inspired by them, Jess being one of them. So for me, I think my advice would be for student nurses is to get onto Twitter, make sure you are kind of aware with the use of social media and the NMC guidelines, which I'm sure you will, and just start connecting, start networking, build up your support network, so then if you do feel like you need to reach out to someone, you can. So yeah, enjoy.
So that was Claire and Molly there. That is normally aimed at students, but I think the message is still the same. So I'm nearly there now, and I do like to bring it back to acknowledging, I guess, the negative side of social media, and sometimes there can be negative conversations as well as the positive in there as well. And it's really important that you kind of look after yourself too. So I've mentioned the fact that I'm not on it all the time, and I do actively encourage those who do use it regularly to take regular time away as well. And the message there, I guess, is that you don't need to live and breathe it, and you're not going to miss things if you're not attached to it all the time. I've included there share if you're unsure. And what I mean by that is sometimes we are engaging with things and we might just want to run it past someone. That's completely fine as well. And be kind is so important. So don't feed the trolls is a saying that I like to use. So say you're involved in a conversation and it's, going in a direction that you don't want to engage with it. It's completely fine to say, I'm stepping away from this conversation now. There is such a thing as a mute button, which is very helpful too. So if you have any self-care tips when it comes to using social media, please do share those in the chat as well. Now, we all have a lot to read, so I'm not going to give you lots of references, and I like to just share a couple of things. So one of them is a blog post I did, which goes into a bit more detail about using social media as a professional. So I'll share that link with you. And another one is the We Nurses community. So these guys are using Twitter like absolute pros. So if, words like tweet chats and things like that, you're thinking, what is she talking about? Follow this link, and they've got some really handy guides and blogs, and they even have some learning, so not e-learning, social learning. So they've got some really quick, 15 minutes snappy learning on their page as well. So I definitely recommend them. And finally, please do network with me. It would be great to connect with you. So my contact details are up there, but they'll also be shared as well afterwards. But yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jess. That was great. And I was reflecting as you were talking in my first year, and I think I had a lecturer that was quite keen on Twitter, but nobody else knew what that was. So she was trying to encourage us to go on Twitter, and none of us took it up at the time because we didn't really understand. And I personally went onto Twitter from the Council of Deans of Health. So it's sort of since then I've been sort of convinced of the change that it can make and the connections. I think exactly as you said, just the connections you can make and the people you can actually liaise with on Twitter. Most often you wouldn't be able to do that in practice, and most often they actually reply to you. So that's great. I was looking at the chat, and there are a couple of questions. I know Nora raised the question that I was also thinking. How do you deal with the negative messages? Sometimes the message that you put up is misinterpreted, and it just gets some negative responses. How do you deal with that, and how do you go past it so you don't sort of fall out of love entirely with social media, which can happen, I think, quite easily?
Absolutely. I do. So personally, I've got a few methods that I use. So one of them I mentioned is kind of just saying I'm kind of tapping out this conversation now. But sometimes, I do hold on to things as well, and I'll reflect and reflect and reflect, and I won't let it go. But I found that talking to others about the conversation that happened and just saying, could I have approached it in a different way? Am I not seeing something here? Just having that conversation can help as well. In more, I guess, intense situations, you can mute people and you can block people on social media. However, I personally try not to do that so much unless it's obviously a troll, because you can run the risk with social media of it becoming an echo chamber of everyone that agrees with or is interested in the same things as you. And personally, I like to use it to find out different people's views as well. But yeah, just stepping away from it sometimes is absolutely fine. You wouldn't in person allow someone to constantly go at you with negativity, so why should you do that online as well?
That's so true. I haven't thought about it that way, but that is very true. Another aspect that I've picked up from the chat, and again, I thought about it as well. When I started putting things on Twitter, I had to sit on it for probably half an hour just for a small tweet, just because I was so panicky, and I was reading, making sure that the spelling is right. What if I misspell something and people would think I don't know how to write? All of that anxiety that comes. Is that just at the beginning, or is that something that most of us feel but we just overcome? How did you come across it at all?
Yeah, it's completely normal, and I still feel it now. If you can look at people's profiles and see how many tweets they've put out, and I'm sure mine are in tens of thousands. I do, for maybe not controversial is the wrong word, but I'm going to go with it. For more controversial things, I use my drafts quite a lot. So if it's something that I think, oh, okay, I'm not sure, I may have spoken to my peers, I'll leave it in there and maybe come back to it a few hours later, read it again, and then if I think it's okay, I'll go with it. So that's a definitely use the drafts is one of my tips. But yeah, I still feel it. It's a bit like imposter syndrome. It never really goes away, does it?
Yeah, indeed. That is, I've never used drafts. I only used it sort of just to I've always deleted my drafts, but that's interesting. Come back to it, just have a breather and come back to it. That's very useful. And I've also seen another message from Vanora saying that you mentioned the messages received during pre-reg training. How do we support lecturers who may be scared of social media? It's interesting.
Okay. Well, so for them, I guess for them engaging with it themselves, there are a number of lecturers who do use it, and they're actually using it for research purposes as well now, which is fab. I actually collaborated with some of the research team at Southampton University. That's where I trained. And we used, we obviously had to get ethics, but we used the data from one of our tweet chats as well. And she just afterwards, she reflected and said, actually, this Twitter thing isn't that bad, is it, Jess? And I said, no, it's not. But I guess when it comes to being in the lecture hall and encouraging it, you don't want to encourage something if you don't believe in it yourself either. So I guess it's about bringing in others like me who can help them along too. Again, at Southampton, what I did when I was still a student, and I did these sessions as part of one of the first year modules, the lecturer whose module it was, he wasn't big on Twitter, but I kind of along the side, we coached each other along. So we created a module hashtag, and any questions that he had, we just did it together. So it was good for me because I was getting some teaching experience, but it was also good for him because he was then learning how to use social media and, you know, connect with his students in a different way. So there are ways around it without them having to be, you know, the most prolific social media users as well. That's fine.
Very innovative, I have to say. What I've also heard is that some universities have sort of use of social media as a module.
Yes.
Yeah. Plymouth, is that right?
Yeah, Plymouth has one. There are others as well. So University of Winchester is doing it too, and I wouldn't want to roll them off the top of my head, but some of them have it as a module, and it runs alongside, so they can get credits for it now. And others, they have like a module hashtag that runs alongside the actual content of the module too. So it's that other way of engaging, but it's also encouraging the students to share their learning with others and not kind of hold on to things. When they find, you know, an amazing paper, they can share it on Twitter with others too. And sometimes you can find the authors. So when you can't get access to it, I've known other students to tweet the author and say, oh, is it okay if you can send it to me, please? And they normally say yes.
Brilliant. I can see Liz has got her hand up. I know I can ask you about a million other questions, but I will hand over to Liz.
No, great presentation, Jess. Thanks ever so much. Partly thinking of Vanora and people like Emma as well, who and Jody, who are all engaged in research. One of the things that's really struck me more and more over the last few years is the amount of people using Twitter to recruit to research projects, and making research much more visible, which I think is fantastic. Because I think to begin with, many years ago when social media was first out, people were saying, oh no, you can't use social media to recruit to a research project, it has to be a different way. Whereas now actually it seems much more prolific, and I wondered what your views were on that, because it seems an ideal vehicle to get to people that wouldn't hear about research otherwise.
No, I'm completely all for it. I think, as you could probably tell, I think there's definitely a hashtag. Is it Why We Do Research is one of the hashtags. But I've enjoyed sharing it from my research nursing colleagues as well, because I think a lot of the time we don't realise that that's an option for us so early in our careers as well. So by seeing what others are doing on social media is very, very useful. I mean, my title at the foundation is Research and Policy Assistant, and I never thought that I'd end up in a role like this so soon after joining the register. So there are definitely, you know, merits to using it, no matter, you know, what kind of setting or role you're in within nursing, for sure.
Anyone else has any other questions? No? Can I ask one more question? Is that all right? How do you break the boundaries with work? So sometimes employers can be similar to your experience in your first year, can be quite sort of taken aback by social media and not necessarily want anything on social media from their employees. and sometimes quite tricky, sort of to keep true to yourself and sort of share your views, but also be mindful. How would you break that? Or how would you...
Personally, what I did do, so at my home trust, I got in touch with the comms team because I read our social media policy at Solent, and it was very, do not do this, do not do that, and it was quite old. So I just got in touch with the comms team because they encourage people to get in touch with them anyway about stories and things like that. So I just had a conversation with them as a new registrant and said, you know, I think this can probably be tweaked a bit. They did ask me though to share with them an example of another organization's policy, and because of my networks I was able to get hold of that, but that may be difficult for other people. But I definitely say, you know, you may as well question it if you don't think it's quite right, if they're being a bit too strict, or ask someone else to do it if you're not comfortable.
I love challenging the rules and the status quo, so well done for that. Thank you so much. I think I've learned quite a lot and sort of got tools to manage sort of the feelings that come with it and the person behind the Twitter handle. The other way I've used it though is to promote a product, or for example the podcast that I've created recently, and my podcast was mainly on Twitter, and that's how it's got the most views. Is that something that you have seen as well?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I didn't actually mention was, again, this is Twitter, but you can have a pinned post on your profile. So when people visit you, if you want them to see something, that will be the first thing that they see after your bio. So yeah, I've shared, you know, my friends' podcasts, or if I'm speaking at an event. So if you go to my Twitter today, I've got RCN thing that I'm doing tonight is my pinned post. So yeah, it's great for sharing things like that. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the talk. It's been really great. I will put my Twitter handle. I normally use Twitter as well, so Twitter handle in the chat. If anyone else wants the Twitter handle, we can sort of find ourselves on Twitter as well. But thank you very much, and thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk to us today.
Thank you.
And now I will introduce the next speaker. The next speaker is Jody Eade. Jody is a dear colleague of mine, working in intensive care. She's an experienced senior sister in Oxford, and she has been recently awarded the only NIHR HE clinical doctoral for a nurse, a clinical doctoral fellowship for a nurse in our trust. Her PhD focus is employing a safety perspective to explore patient iteration management. She combines an interest in human factors methodologies with significant clinical experience to explore her research interest. But the bit that I absolutely love is that Jody is keen to facilitate clinical academic roles for nurses within healthcare, which I personally think is the future. Jody, thank you very much for accepting to do a talk for us, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you. Right, I will just share my screen. Okay, can you see that? Brilliant, that's amazing. Excellent, okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak. As Raluca said, my name's Jody, and I'm going to talk to you today about a interview technique, which is a human factors interview method, which is applied cognitive task analysis, or ACTA for short. And I'm really hoping that this today will be something that's a bit new, novel, hopefully interesting, and also something that's really practical that I'd really hope that some of you might want to go away and try and use yourself. I also, just a bit of a disclaimer, I'm getting over a bit of a cold, so apologies if I start to cough. So just to let you know what we'll be covering, I'll start by just giving a little bit more background about myself. I'll go through the beginnings of task analysis, and then the movement towards cognitive task analysis, which ACTA is a branch of, and then I'll go through and describe the actual methodology, and then I'll just very briefly talk to you a little bit about how I'm using it in my PhD study, so sort of give you a real world example, I suppose. So as Raluca said, I'm an ITU nurse in Oxford. I've been there for about 16 years, just started my PhD, so I'm now into year 2 of that, and I'm really lucky to be supervised by some amazing people, so Professor Ruth Endicott, and also Associate Professor Peter Watkinson from Oxford University, so really good supervisory team. So as most of you will be aware, human factors is sort of a marriage between cognitive psychology and engineering. And the primary focus of human factor scientists is to harmonize 3 key elements of a working system, and that is the people, the task, the job that they need to do, and the organization. And by harmonizing all of those 3 elements, the idea is that you get a healthier workforce, and also you get better outputs and higher quality outputs. The core foundation to any human factors method is task analysis, which is understanding what people need to do, what resources they need to be able to do it, and how that can be improved. And it actually started, it was actually started by a chap called Frank Gilbreth as early as 1911. And he was an engineer, worked on a lot of building projects, but noticed that bricklayers tended to use different methods in the way that they laid bricks. So there was a lot of variability in the methods that they used, and therefore the outputs of those were varying in quality. So sometimes they were, really robust methodology, and other times they weren't, and there was a lot of variability in time. So what he did was he made some simple sort of environmental changes that meant that the bricklayers could actually have the equipment that they needed close to hand. They built specialist storage systems, and what they did, it was really simple, but all they did was they reduced the amount of movements that the task took to be able to generate a robust building, or robust architecture. So they reduced the whole process down from 18 moves to 14 moves, so significantly improving the efficiency and effectiveness of that process. So that was sort of the birth of task analysis. But things have changed, things have moved on. Our workplace has changed, and no longer are we performing simple tasks. The tasks that we were performing that were simple generally now have been automated, and actually what spills over then is what is very complex and what needs a higher level of thinking. So actually, whilst automation has made our life simpler in some ways, it's actually just left the really cognitively challenging elements to our jobs. So actually, there's been a movement to realise that it's not so much just about the task, but it's about the expertise and the skills that people have to deliver those tasks, which also affects the efficiency and effectiveness of the process. So that was the movement then to a cognitive task analysis. So not just focusing on the task itself, but actually what are the expertise involved that means that people can deliver those tasks. And that was in around the 1980s. And what sort of leaders and managers and cognitive behavioural scientists realised is that actually sometimes we need to reduce our decision making time without compromising on quality. And how could we go about doing that? Sorry, I'm just going to remove the box so I can read it. And actually what they realised was that it was much better to try and understand how people make tough decisions in difficult conditions, limited time and uncertainty, and in unstable conditions. So actually there's a lot of value in understanding how people navigate really tricky scenarios. Sorry, it's not moving. Okay, so that then moved the sort of understanding on in terms of, there are lots of theories and models about how decisions are made, but what I'm going to focus on is how we can understand those decisions and how we can draw out those elements of expertise. And these are the box on the right is about the 3 key cognitive investigation methods. The critical incident technique and the critical decision method are actually 2 of the earliest methods, but they're very, very complex, and you need an awful lot of training to be able to undertake these methods. So they're relatively inaccessible in some ways. And one of the beauty of applied cognitive task analysis is that it's specifically been developed to be accessible to people that don't necessarily have a psychology or behavioural background. So what is applied cognitive task analysis method? So it was developed in the 1990s by Rob Hutton and Laura Matteo, and it was actually part of a 2-year research project funded by the Navy. And as I said, it was developed specifically to streamline cognitive task analysis and to elicit elements of expertise that people used whilst completing tasks within sort of Navy scenarios. And it utilises subject matter experts. And what they've actually done is they've combined 3 methods together, which makes it a really usable and useful methodology to use during interviews. And it centres around a task analysis, a knowledge audit, and also a simulation if required. And the questions within the interview sort of topic guide are actually specifically designed to probe elements of expertise and the domains of expertise. So what Rob Hutton and Laura Matteo did was they collated all of the behavioural science literature and identified what it was that made somebody an expert. And what they identified was that experts, this is just an example of some of the domains of expertise, but what they found was that experts are often able to very quickly spot anomalies because they're able to see typicality and what is typical for a scenario. Something that I really love is that experts are able to see the invisible. So novices see what is there and experts see what is not. And I think that's a really interesting concept. The studies that they've done on expert physicians, actually, they use the presence of symptoms as much as they use the absence of symptoms to help them understand and create a picture of a presenting illness, which I think is really fascinating. Experts are able, because of the pattern recognition and that they're able to draw on all of this experience, they're able to make better predictions, and then they're also able to compensate for sort of flaws in the system and circumnavigate certain difficult scenarios. So they're the sort of some of the elements to what they drew out of that literature. So this is my topic guide that I'm using in my PhD. As I said, there are 3 key elements to the ACTA methodology. The first is a task diagram where you get the interviewee to just describe in 6 steps the process that you're talking about, just really simple. Then you move through onto these questions, and they're predetermined questions that are generated from the ACTA methodology that probe specific elements, so perceptual skills, prediction, the bigger picture, and noticing opportunities and job smarts. It's really flexible, so you are allowed to use some questions more than others if you find that you're getting a better response by some of the questions. And also, if you're not able to draw out as the sort of level of detail that you were anticipating, you can then add in a simulation interview. So using something like it's based on the critical decision method, but using a simulation example to help the participant kind of verbalize what is actually really difficult to try and explain to someone, how you know someone is getting sick, or how you knew that that patient that was under sedation was actually having a seizure. You know, it's really difficult knowledge to try and verbalize, and that's exactly what this methodology sets out to do, is to help the participant explain that sort of tacit underlying knowledge. This just gives an example. So the actor method is fairly prescriptive in the questions that you ask, but what I also really like about it is that it actually gives you it gives you an example of what the data results will look like as well. So the idea is that you have two key tables that are outputs from these interviews. The first is the analysis knowledge audit table, and this is some data that came from a fire service interview study, which they used the actor methodology on, and it's fascinating, some of the sort of unique nuggets of information that came out of interviewing these expert firemen. So the knowledge audit table has three main columns. You look at the aspects of expertise, then what are the cues and strategies that that person uses, and then why is it difficult? So you get to a feel for what it is that that's going to trip a novice up in this process. And some of the things that came out from this was that expert firemen, when they get called to an explosion, so this was quite an old study, but when they used to get called to an explosion, they were taught to go to the center of the explosion and work their way out. But actually what the expert firemen would do is work further out from the center of the blast, because they were more likely to find survivors. So it's just those really kind of useful bits of information. And the other thing is, you know, that they would notice breathing sounds of victims to help them identify and locate where the victims were. So just really, really interesting cues. And then the second table that you would get from your data is a cognitive demands table. So the things that are particularly cognitively challenging, which has been identified in the knowledge audit, is then analysed further within this table. So what was the difficult cognitive element? Why is that difficult? What are the common areas that people make mistakes in? And then what do they do to combat those problems? So again here, going back to listening to breathing sounds for people in a blast, actually what they experienced firemen would do is both them and their search partner would hold their breaths and then listen for breathing sounds, because often it's really hard to, obviously they're hot and they're stressed, and it's obviously quite hard to hear over your own sound of your breathing. So that was a strategy that they would use to help them identify where potential victims were. And from this, you get, you can develop things like cues inventories, a very clear idea about what will be challenging to novices, and then you can add that into training materials or your training processes. So just to move on to sort of how I'm using this, this is just very briefly, but so my study is called the SUFFICE study, which is success factors facilitating care during escalation. And it's about looking at the process of rescue. So how, rather than looking at failure to rescue, how are we actually rescuing our patients? Why does that process work? And what are the expert cues that people are using to be able to facilitate that? So it's one of my, it's my last phase of my study. So it's interviewing sort of 30 expert staff of all professions, and I'm hoping to use the cognitive demands table and the knowledge audit to help me develop a cues inventory that could potentially feed into training programs and that kind of thing. So I won't cover this slide, but the reason that I think that we can learn something from this is that there is such variability in response to hospital complication rates. So actually, there's a real value in looking at your high performing areas and your experts and understanding what it is that they do that means they can navigate that system and create these positive outcomes for patients. So that's the sort of premise for and the rationale for why I'm using it. I thought it was best to just provide some limitations of the methodology. Obviously, I think it's a really good interview technique, but it's not been widely used, so it does need some more validation studies. The data is very much dependent on the skill of the analyst and the interviewer. But I think that's the same for any interview, actually. And there's questions surrounding reliability. And I think, again, that's very true of most interviews. You know, I might give a very different interview today than I would tomorrow. So I think there's always a reliability issue. The other thing is that you do need access to subject matter experts, and then you can kind of come under criticism about how you're defining expertise, because obviously you could be a newly qualified nurse and perform better than a nurse that's been working, you know, for 10 years. So there is you can come under criticism, but I mean, you have to take a pragmatic view and you have to maximize your chances of eliciting the expertise within the domain that you're interested in. And then, so just to conclude then, our work system is getting ever more complex and cognitively challenging, and therefore our research methods need to sort of encompass and embrace that complexity. There are significant benefits to identifying knowledge and skills that allow experts to navigate this really tricky system. And I think that ACTA is a really usable technique that gives a really clear idea of the process involved. I really like the results tables that it suggests that you use, because actually qualitative data can be quite tricky to sort of make sense of. So I really like that idea. It does have some limitations in being not heavily validated, but it is quite a novel technique. So, and that's it. So thank you ever so much for listening.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jody. That was a very interesting subject, and obviously I absolutely love your PhD subject, so I can't wait for the results to come through. But it was quite thought-provoking for me, and I guess the first thing that I wanted to pick up on, and I've seen a comment as well, you were saying about the expert and the novice, which I thought was really interesting, and there's a question whether or not there are any patterns also based on intuition and tacit knowledge. Is that makes an expert, that makes a difference?
I think, well, I mean, from the research, they think that experts can pull on an inventory of between 10,000 and 100,000 patterns. So I think, and actually I try and steer away from kind of intuition, because actually, and I know exactly what you mean, I think, yes, there is a lot of pattern recognition, but I think our intuition is actually us making sense of very, very small details that we often find really difficult to know ourselves. And I think that we should really try and sort of dig deeper to try and understand what it is that makes us concerned about that patient, that the breathing is slightly laboured and their confusion has got worse than yesterday, and actually they've not eaten anything today, and, you know, try and be a bit more specific to hold a bit more weight, I think.
Yes, I think very often we just say, oh, I've got a feeling this patient is not very well today, but you can't put your finger on it. So I guess what you're saying is to just go deep and see what you mean by that, isn't it?
Yeah.
There is a question as well from Venora saying, how does this method compare to the Think Aloud method? And do you use, is that vignettes?
Vignettes.
Vignettes, there you go.
So, sorry, let me just have a look at that question. How does this method compare to Think Aloud methods, and do you use vignettes? Yes, okay, so yeah, the Think Aloud, I've used Think Aloud actually before, and it's really, I've used Think Aloud in like usability studies to try and understand what people are, why they're doing the actions that they're doing, why they're using a computer system in a certain way, why do they use that shortcut. I think the beauty of the actor methodology is that because it centers around all of those sort of elements of expertise, I do think it really helps people to verbalize what is actually quite difficult sometimes to get across to people. So I think the Think Aloud is good, but I think that the depth of information that you will probably get is better with the actor methodology, would be my thoughts. But there's nothing to say that you couldn't do both, which would be quite nice, a quite nice study.
Was there anything else, Fenora, that you wanted to ask on that?
Really trying to get my mind around how the actor worked and, you know, how you walked somebody through. So maybe if you could say a wee bit more about, you know, how you actually communicate that discussion. I mean, to me, it's difficult without a vignette, you know, it seems quite separate in a research situation. So are you in clinical practice observing that expertise, or how does it work? I suppose I don't know how the actor works.
Yeah, so I mean, so I'm using actor as a sort of complementary method to observations within my study, and also some notes reviews. So I'm getting that sort of subjective observation of rescue events. The actor methodology is, so that the questions are laid out for you, and actually I'm very happy, I can send you the actual paper, but they're really nice the way they introduce the ideas. So it will often say, experts are able to often see patterns and make discriminations that novices just can't see. Can you tell me about a situation that just popped out at you, that you knew what had happened before and where it was heading? You know, it's just a really kind of so I'm working quite closely with Rob Hutton, and he said actually that's the kind of buttering up element of it. It makes people feel really comfortable and makes them go, well, yeah, actually I am an expert and I do use this information, I do use this knowledge that I've gleaned over many years. So but it, as I say, it is flexible as well. You know, he says that use the questions that you get the most yield from. You don't, and you know, you don't have to just read it from a sort of checklist, I suppose, and probe deeper into the events that they do bring up as part of the method. So yeah, I mean, it is quite prescriptive, and I do like that because it's based on the evidence, but also there is a bit of flexibility.
Do you find that people have the insight? I suppose when we've done studies around intuition, people, they don't really know why, they just know, you know.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, some of the things that I'm getting, it's a shame that I haven't really got any data to show you, so I'd love to present some of the interview data actually when I've looked at it properly. But things like, so one of the questions is, have you has there been a scenario where you realised doing the standard procedure wouldn't work? And that tends to reveal a whole host of things that people, you know, like the workers done and workers imagine. So a whole host of things that people in the protocols, they say they should be doing, but actually they don't work, and this is why they don't work, and actually the system's only running because they are they're navigating the system differently. So there's definitely some really interesting insights, I think.
It's fascinating, and for me it's actually fascinating from a different point of view as well. So obviously I started as a newly qualified in intensive care, and there are those situations where you can learn as much as you can during the foundation program, but you're still a bit stuck and you feel like I should really know this, but you don't know what to do. And I just feel this gives me permission to say, well, actually, it was fine. You're all right. You didn't need to know what to do, because it comes with that those skills that you're talking about. So I think it's interesting to see it from the other side, and perhaps it's great to look at our foundation program and introduce a little bit of this there. I think it will give a lot of people a lot peace of mind later on.
Yeah.
Liz, you had your hand up.
Yeah, great presentation, Jody. Thank you. One of the things I was interested in is when people have been recalling their events or talking about their stories with you, have the very nature of them talking it through with you helped them to then suddenly think, oh, that's why that happened, or that's why I made that decision, when perhaps they might not have realized at the time why they were making that decision. They were but actually sharing that event or sharing that story with you has helped to clarify in their own mind why something has happened. Has anything like that happened with you?
I think what's been really interesting is the way that the questions are worded, and I say this at the beginning of the interview, it's that they are a little bit tricky the way they're worded. Actually, they, you know, on some of the questions initially they're like, oh no, I've got nothing to say about that. But actually, as our discussions go on and we then talk about an actual example, then things will come to them of, actually, yes, I did just walk into that situation, and I did know that if that patient wasn't admitted under the medics that night and seen within 2 hours, that actually it would drag out the kind of diagnosis and the interventions and things. So actually, I think it does highlight to them what they sort of take as almost for granted, because that's what experts do. You know, they did a study in grandmaster chess players, and these grandmasters would go through almost in an instant thousands and thousands of scenarios, but their first one that they really consciously thought about was generally the right move to make. And actually, I think what this does show and demonstrate is that you navigate a really difficult system, and actually it's amazing that we have such good outcomes for our patients, and it's only because you know how that system works, and you know what are the stumbling blocks, and you avoid that you've created this really positive, safe outcome. So I think we almost underplay how hard it is to do what we do, and I think this is a really good example, and this shows actually what the skills they use are. So yeah, I think there's definitely been sort of light bulb moments during the interviews, which has been lovely.
I will be looking forward to the results, and we'll send you an invite out when you've got them ready. Definitely, it'll be very interesting to know what you find.
Yeah.
Does anyone else has any other questions for Jody at all?
I just had a couple of comments. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah, just a couple of historical comments on the Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. They were very famous for having 12 children and writing the book Cheaper by the Dozen, in which they incorporated a number of their cost-saving methods and very funny scenarios, if you ever get a chance to read that. I think it was later made into a film also. That was one thing. And then just a sort of interesting validation of what you said about experts and patterns, because I had a stepfather a number of years ago who used to work in a factory that made very beautiful fabrics in Chicago. And one day the factory burned to the ground, and he remembered the 12,000 patterns that they made. Just as another validation of what you said, from 10 to 100,000, and they were able to recreate them.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's a true story, so.
That's amazing. Yeah.
But they always say it takes about 10 years to become an expert in anything, so it does take a bit of time. and attention.
Assistance. Let's not give up.
Yes, that's right.
Brilliant. Well, I think if nobody has got any more questions or comments for either Jody or Jess, I'm looking across. I want to thank both Jody and Jess for joining us today and for the presentations. They've been really useful. I've made a lot of notes and points there. Just to ask, are you happy for people to contact you for any other questions if they've got, Jody, Jess?
Yes, absolutely.
Are you happy to share your email, or do you want us to share your email if somebody contacts us? Are you happy? Grand. I've also added my Twitter handle and the chapter Twitter handle, Phi Mu chapter. If you're on Twitter, if you follow us. And thank you for everyone that's been here and they've joined and they listened to the presentations today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yes. It's been a super afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot. I think that's the value of nursing, isn't it? You learn every day, and there's always something new and exciting to hear about. So thank you very much to all of you and people who've asked questions as well. It's been really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.